DogWorks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
Start your day tomorrow with The Daily Dog with Michelle Forto, the morning podcast on DogWorks Radio. Apple Podcast reviewer Patty Christensen calls it funny, smart, and filled with all the info I want to know about dogs. I love this show. Wake up with The Daily Dog. Available on DogWorks Radio on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your shows.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to Mushing Radio here on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site, and you can find us over on DogWorksRadio.com. Check us out on social media, searching for DogWorks Radio, and make sure you like and review us over on Apple Podcasts. And I am joined by my co-host, Alex Stein. Alex, how is it going?
It's going great, Robert. It seems like this is the second year in a row where there seems to be a lot of stuff that's going to be happening in the off season. And I know one of the things that we want to talk about, the main thing we want to talk about, is the rule changes that the Iditarod Trail Committee has just enacted. And while there's not a lot of things that are surprising, it's the issues that we've talked about and a lot of people close to the race have been, and fans of the race have been talking about for a while. But it's interesting to me, and I am hoping that we're not going to have like another summer where there is just a lot of controversy about the Iditarod, although I'm afraid that always could happen.
It could, excuse me. And we spoke many a times, and now the Iditarod is becoming a year-round sport, very similar to like the NFL and things like that, with these off-season meetings that are making a lot of press. You know, in days past, but well before social media, often we wouldn't hear about things like this until much closer to the race. So it's interesting now that there is so much commentary going back and forth about these rule changes and whether it's going to make the race better or worse for both mushers and fans. So let's jump right into this, Alex. How about you start us off with what the rules are, then we'll talk a little bit about them.
Yeah, so there are a number of changes that are significant. Some that I'm not sure if they're significant. They may actually turn out to be more significant than the more flashy changes, but I'll just run them down. Starting in the next year's race, 2019. Teams will be limited to starting with 14 dogs instead of 16, which is the current number. There is a new rule, which is sort of informally being referred to as the dead dog rule, which is that if a dog on a team dies during the race, then that musher will be withdrawn from the race unless the death is ruled to be caused solely by unforeseeable external forces. Additionally, all dog deaths will be reviewed by a panel within 30 days of the end of the race. Mushers will be forced to adopt kennel standards from Mush with Pride, which is an organization started by mushers in 1991. And I believe all Iditarod entrants are required to join Mush with Pride, but it's been voluntary for them to adopt and abide by the best practices spelled out by Mush with Pride. From now on, mushers will be required to sign a statement that they are following these best practices standards. And if there is any indication that they are not, the Iditarod has the ability now to go and inspect the kennels of anyone suspected of not following those standards. In addition, the board is going to be increased to 12 members. I believe it's currently 10. The musher representative will no longer be able to vote in the board meetings, but will be there to represent the mushers' points of view and to advise the board. Starting on July 1st, board members cannot compete in the Iditarod. They also cannot serve on the board if they competed the year before, and even if they leave the board, they cannot compete for 1 year after. And the term limits for board members there are now going to be term limits for board members. They will serve 3-year terms and are limited to 3 3-year terms. And then the last thing, which hasn't gotten a lot of attention, but Tom Swan wrote about it on Facebook, is there is something called Rule 53, where we talked a lot about the gag rule in the past couple of years. From now on, mushers, according to this rule, will be held to a high standard of personal conduct on and off the trail year-round. And any abuse, statements injurious to the race, or illegal activities are subject to potential penalties, including people being blacklisted from the race for several years. And I guess if the crime is bad enough, they could be banned for life. So that's kind of stretching out the gag rule. In the past, there was a period, I believe, from 30 days after the end of the race until someone had signed up for the next Iditarod, during which they were free, if they wanted to say whatever they wanted. And I believe under this rule, they will now not have that sort of safe window to say anything they want.
Yeah, so quite a bit to talk about today. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens between now and when the race signs up just in a couple of weeks on June 30th at the picnic. But Alex, which one do you want to start with? Let's start with a fan's perspective, and then I'll give my perspective, at least from my knowledge as a musher, not necessarily an Iditarod musher, but at least a race competitor for several years. Which one do you want to talk about first?
Let's talk about the number of dogs, because I think that's a very interesting and perhaps not as clear as it could be new rule.
Okay. What are your thoughts on that one?
I'm not exactly sure what this means. Certainly, 14 dogs are extremely powerful. So I don't think that in terms of power, there's going to be that much of a change. I do think that, a lot of people have talked about, well, it's 2 fewer dogs that you have to take care of at checkpoints, that you have to feed and booty and examine all of their muscles and everything. So that might help mushers a little bit. I think it also could perhaps help some of the smaller kennels, because if you don't have 16 slots to fill, I think that will mean that smaller kennels that maybe don't have a lot of extra dogs would be able to just field their best dogs. And I think that it could mean that some mushers who would take a yearling that they know will not finish the race, or maybe they're not sure will be able to do it, but they just want to give the dog that experience, that's not going to happen quite as often. I think that with 14 dogs, there's going to be a lot more. It's going to be a lot more important to fill those slots, rather than thinking, oh, I have 1 or 2 dogs that could be less competitive or just need a little bit more trail time that I'll put in harness. So I'm not really sure. I don't know that it will considerably cut down the speed of the race, because 14 dogs is still very, very powerful. The Yukon Quest I believe, has a 14-dog limit, and certainly the Yukon Quest is a very strenuous and difficult race. So I'm not really sure that it's going to have that much of a difference from a fan perspective.
First off, Alex, you talked about power, and I want to bring up a point from that fan's perspective. When you were out at our place running a team of dogs, you had a string of 8 dogs hooked up to the line. Can you tell our folks that have never been on the back of a dog sled just how powerful a team of 8 dogs is?
Well, you know, a team of 8 dogs can really just zoom out of the gate, can just really, really, really take you very, very fast. And so, you know, there's this feeling, I think, a lot in this society that if we just have more of anything, that it's better. And I'm here to tell you that 8 dogs certainly were very, very powerful, and more powerful than I expected or than I was really prepared for. So, you know, I don't know how much incremental power you get out of 16 instead of 14, but 14 dogs is a very, very powerful team.
My thoughts on this is I know that this was proposed a few months ago in a Facebook post by Jeff King, and he has been providing excellent commentary over the last several months about a lot of these new rules that have come up, and I think they really heeded some of his thoughts about this. So I think that it's a good thing, and I know we've talked about this before on the show after Jeff brought up those rules. I don't think that there's going to be a big speed difference between that 16 and 14, because as people that are mushers know, you're only as fast as your slowest dog, and those slow dogs will be the ones that stay home on this 14-dog team. Secondly, I agree with you with having those 2 fewer dogs helps with those smaller kennels. They're not having to borrow, lease, or whatever from other kennels to find dogs to fill that team. It may not be just those 2, but when you mix in several of those dogs that are not used to the musher, not used to the dog team, not used to the intricacies of what's happening, that can really throw a wrench into what's happening on the trail. I do think 14 dogs is a little bit easier to care for. It takes about an hour to an hour and a half or so to get all of your chores done. So if you could knock even 10 minutes off of that time, that gives the dogs a little bit more rest and, of course, gives the musher a little bit more rest as well. And also, as you mentioned, the Yukon Quest has been running with 14 dogs, I believe, ever since the inception of that race, and they have done very well. I believe Alan Moore, who won this year, won with a team of 14 dogs, so it's definitely possible to be able to do so. On the negative side of that, I think that with a smaller pool of dogs, mushers may be a little bit loose in how they manage dog drops. I know that they did not change the number of dogs that you have to finish with, and I believe right now it is 5. So with those 2 extra dogs that are no longer on the team, that leaves a little bit less play with the number of dogs that you can drop. Dropping dogs is not necessarily just for dogs that are injured or not wanting to pull, but it's also considered a strategy. Many mushers start with dogs that are running that they know that they're going to drop at a particular checkpoint. They may be stronger dogs or faster dogs or dogs that pull well over mountains or whatever. So if you don't have that strategy that's built in with the 2 extra dogs, that could put a hindrance on what could happen down the trail. But all in all, I do think it's a good thing. I think that dog care will be heightened, and I think anytime that is a part of the race, it's in a positive. What's next, Alex?
So next is the so-called dead dog rule. And this is something that Iditarod had a version of this a long time ago, and then I believe it was Rick Swenson had a dog that died on the trail, and he was withdrawn or disqualified because of this, and there was a big hubbub, and he threatened to sue the ITC, and then the rule was rescinded the next year. I think, I think that this is something that is going to probably lead to some uncertainty and some confusion and some trouble. The wording about unless it's caused solely by unforeseeable external forces is something that is frankly a little bit vague, and I worry that on the trail people will be able to make that determination. One of the things that sometimes happens is and I want to say again, and I know we say this every time, but I want to say again that obviously the goal is to have zero dog deaths, or a goal is to have zero dog deaths, and any time a dog dies, it's a horrible and sad thing. But one of the things that tends to be very harmful and sometimes fatal to these athletes is when they have stomach ulcers, and there are things that mushers can do, giving them certain antacid type drugs to guard against that. But if a dog dies on the trail, I think it's not always clear why that dog died. And if you have to make a decision about whether to let someone continue in the race or not, I worry that it would be hard to make that determination. And if a dog dies, say from some sort of stomach ulcer, how do you? A lot of these deaths are completely unforeseen. But how do you determine whether it's caused by external forces or whether it's caused by something the musher did or didn't do, or some sort of, genetic problem in the dog's line that didn't come up until they were in the race? So I think that's going to be a very difficult rule to enforce. I understand why the ITC did it, and there's certainly a lot of pressure from external groups about dog deaths and about making sure that people threatening to shut the Iditarod down because there are unfortunately several dog deaths. And I think that this is going to be a very, very difficult rule to enforce fairly.
I fully agree with just about everything you said there, Alex. There has been quite a bit of pressure, especially in the last few years, from many of those animal rights groups and just the lay people that don't know a lot about the sport of mushing, and they think that it's cruel to have dogs run 1,000 miles because they're used to seeing what they see with their golden retriever that lays around on the couch watching television with them on the weekend. So it's an entirely different puppy, pun intended there, between a sled dog and a house dog. Secondly, I don't agree necessarily with the immediate withdrawal or scratch from the musher. I think that puts a lot of pressure on the race officials to make such a quick call in very extreme conditions. And I know the rule as it's written or proposed now, that final determination will be made by the race marshal. But just imagine, Alex, if a dog passes away at 3 o'clock in the morning on the trail at 30 below, and it's from unknown causes. The dog just unfortunately drops dead on the line. Just that range of emotions from everybody, and what needs to be done at that split moment, at that split second. Fortunately, in 24 years, I have never had a dog die in harness or on a sled dog team itself, meaning running and pass away. So I don't know exactly all of the emotions that could possibly go through your mind at that point. It's really tough to lose any dog. We just recently lost one of our favorite dogs, Spencer, who had a stroke a few weeks ago, and I tell you what, Alex, I was sitting in his kennel crying before we ended up taking him in, and it's a tough way to live if you have all these dogs that eventually have to pass away. So it's a tough call one way or the other on how this rule can be in effect. What troubles me the most is they said that they're going to make a determination within 30 days of what happened to the dog, or if there's some type of neglect or whatever. And I know not only in veterinary medicine but also in human medicine, toxicology reports take a heck of a long time to get back. I remember we had a dog pass away and we didn't know why. It wasn't from a medical issue, it wasn't from a genetic issue, but we thought, okay, did he get into something? Was he poisoned? Whatever. And it took 3 or 4 months for that toxicology report to finally come back, and it was an undetermined cause of why the dog died. So you just don't know, and there's no way you can know in 30 days of exactly what happened. So hopefully this rule was not written to appease the pressure from those outside groups. But as we said just a few minutes ago, this race has got to be about the dogs, and a rule like this definitely protects them, and I think that it's a good thing on that point. But we need to make sure that it's done correctly, otherwise it could have a heck of a lot of backlash.
Definitely. And, some people have been saying on social media that this rule will encourage mushers to drop dogs earlier rather than, if there's a dog that seems to have some distress, it'll encourage them to drop that dog rather than continue with the dog and hope that whatever the issue is will work itself out. I'm not really sure. I don't have enough knowledge to know if that's an accurate theory, but it kind of makes sense to me.
It does, but then that goes right back to what we were talking about in the first rule with the 14-dog rule and dropping dogs. So if you have a dog that's in mild distress and you're only 100 miles into the race and you drop that dog, what happens if you do that 4, 5, or 6 more times just as a precautionary measure? And here you are at Unaclete, 300 miles from the end of the race, and you only have 6 or 7 dogs left because you've dropped these dogs for relatively minor causes with the hopes of nothing exacerbating. I think that could, again, prove disastrous, not only in terms of strategy, but just the overall ability to finish a race.
Right. And the other thing that I just wanted to point out, and Karen Ramstead, who has been an Iditarod competitor for many years and has also been an Iditarod judge on the trail, had a post about one of her dogs that died on the trail, and it was devastating to her, as I believe it is to anybody who has a dog die in harness. And she said that she's against this rule. In her case, when her dog died, she chose to scratch because she just was, in addition to it changing how the team was going, she was just devastated and didn't feel like she could continue. And I've heard a lot of mushers say the same things when something has happened to one of their dogs, that they frequently scratch, or if they continue, it definitely has an effect on the rest of their race. So I'm not entirely sure that I agree with this rule. I understand where it's coming from, but I think that this is going to open up a big can of worms whenever it happens.
And, that's a great point that you brought up about Karen's post. I read that as well. And she talks in that post quite a bit about if this were to happen, she would not have that ability to grieve. And I think that's a great point. Here you are out in the middle of nowhere and your dog passes away and, you're an emotional wreck. And the next thing you know, somebody walks up to you and says, sir, ma'am, I have to tell you, you're now out of the race, whether you want to be or not. because your dog had just passed away. And I can imagine just what would happen at that point, because as it sits right now, it's probably a very collective effort. If a dog passes away, now all the checkers and race crew and fellow mushers that are there are coming to the aid of that person who had just lost a dog. But now, as Karen said, are these people going to be blacklisted because their dog has now died, because now they've been withdrawn or forced to scratch? That cloud of speculation, is that going to be over their head because that happens, and now they're sort of the pariah of the race because one of their dogs unfortunately died on the trail?
Right. And, I also want to emphasize that as someone who is not a musher, not, entering races, and I can imagine what it would feel like if that happened, but I don't feel like I really can understand or fully grasp what it is like. And so I'm reluctant to, I understand that it is devastating when this happens, but I'm reluctant to, condemn anyone if they've chosen in the past to continue with their race. I understand when people withdraw, but I also understand that there might be circumstances where, this sounds horribly cliched, but where you would think, well, this is a dog who died doing what they loved, and it would, in some ways, perhaps honor this dog more to continue. It's a very personal choice, and I don't want to, step in and make judgments either way.
Oh, I agree with you fully. What's the next one, Alex?
So the next one is the board. The board increasing to 12 and having the musher representative not vote.
Okay. What are your thoughts on that one?
I'm not really sure about that one. I wonder about taking the vote away from the musher representative. That's the only thing that I would say regarding the board. I'm glad that there is a musher representative who can at least voice concerns for the mushers, but I wonder what the thinking was to take the vote away from that representative.
Right. So let's talk about the term limits and nepotism and that sort of thing in just a sec. But let's address the number on the board first, as you mentioned. As the local news had said, I believe it was Friday Friday evening when this news broke, that they were going to add a couple of positions to the board, and the local affiliate said that they hope to have businesses or community-minded individuals as these second and these two other board positions. I think that's a very good thing to have some outside influence, whether it's a local business owner or a community advisor or whatever. I think that would add some fresh perspective to the race, and I fully agree with that. I think that the race needs that. I think it's been sort of a good old boy, good old gal, per se, network for a very long time, and we need some fresh perspective and fresh voices with that. I fully agree with that, and I know that you and I talked a while back when they talked about not having the musher representative as a voice. I think that's a really big hindrance on the race, because it is the mushers who are out there. They are the voice of the Iditarod Finishers Club, I believe it's called, sort of that unofficial union of Iditarod mushers. And if that person, who right now is Wade Mars, does not have that voice, or they will have a voice, but they won't have a vote. Just like in any voting setup in our country, whether it be the Supreme Court, where it has to be unanimous or a majority, if they have that split decision, let's say everybody's there on the board voting at that time, if that person is not there, it's an automatic unanimous vote because it's an odd number. And I think that's very interesting with just 11 people that are allowed to vote. What is also interesting based on that, and I know that many votes happen this way, including several mushing clubs that I'm a part of, is there were only 4 people at this board meeting when all of these rules were proposed and voted on. So only a third of the potential board was there to vote. And Wade Mars was there, and he did not get a vote. So I think it's very interesting that that they're going to add some, but also take away that very important vote from the mushers themselves.
Right, and I should point out that a lot of the board members are themselves former mushers, people who have run Iditarod, and a lot of the people associated with the ITC are people who have a history in mushing and a history with running the Iditarod race. But in many cases, it's people who have not run the race in many, many years, sometimes decades. And as we've discussed frequently, this is a very different race in 2018 or 2019 than it was in the 1980s or 90s. So if you have people whose experience and whose knowledge is kind of rooted in what it was like to run the race 20 years ago or 30 years ago, I think that's a bit of a disadvantage, because the realities of the race and the realities of what are happening on the ground have changed considerably.
Right, and that, Alex, leads right into the second part of this this new board setup with the change in you cannot be an active musher and on the board. And there's also a piece in there that I don't know if we brought up at the top of the show about having family members as a part of this. So let's start off with the ability to be on the board and not be a competitor, either before or after or during. What are your thoughts on that one?
You know, I think that's generally a good idea. It prevents people from making rules that would benefit themselves or in some cases benefit family members. So that's something that I think has been pretty widely called for and not that controversial. I do like the idea of having term limits. It prevents it from being, a complete good old boys club or good old girls club for many, many years. And I think that over the course of the next few years, when people, reach the limits of how long they can serve, that's going to help the race to have some fresh blood coming into the board.
I do not like this portion of the rule, because if a person wants to be on the board, I believe the current rule is set up that they cannot be a racer a year before or a year after. And if they do take that 3-year term, that effectively puts that person out of the race for 5 years. And I don't think that that's a good thing on any way you look at it, because if somebody comes in and they want to make a change with Iditarod and they want to do well and they want to have a voice and they have a lot of things to bring to the table, I don't know if they're going to get the caliber of person that they're looking for, if they're going to jeopardize their mushing career by a half a decade just so they can have a voice on the board. Otherwise, you get, on the other hand, as you mentioned, people that have not been in the race for decades, or they've never been in the race at all. I think that sets up a dichotomy that you're not going to have the experience and the wherewithal from people that know what's happening on the trail today on the board, that can make the decisions that can affect the outcome of the race.
I completely agree with you on all of that, and I don't have much else to say about it. I worry about that as well.
So let's talk a little bit about the family members on the board. I know that this was talked about much earlier in the off season as well. My first thought on this, and then I'll hear yours, is how far back does that go? Does it go back to brothers and sisters, moms and dads, or does it go back to cousins or husbands and wives? Where does that fit in? I think this is a very interesting one in terms of sort of the way it's laid out now. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you as well. I think that the lack of real specificity in terms of defining exactly what we consider family members, and if it's close family members, if it's there are a lot of Reddingtons who run the race, for example, and Joe Reddington Jr. was one of the people who started the race and is called the father of the Iditarod. And certainly the Reddingtons have a great deal of institutional memory about the race and about the history of the race and about all sorts of things that have gone into the race over the years. So does that now mean that the board can't have any Reddingtons in the race as long as there are Reddingtons running the race? That seems to me that it might be shooting yourself in the foot a little bit. On the other hand, there's the other family that sort of comes to mind in this is the Seavies, and I know that Dan Seavey has been on the board, I believe is still on the board, and his son Mitch and grandson Dallas have run and won the race many, many times. So I'm wondering also if this rule is partially being put into place to perhaps punish the Seavies, which doesn't really seem fair. So I'm with you. I would like to see this defined a little bit more clearly, because I'm not sure how far this goes in terms of prohibiting family members.
Right, and just if we go back to what we just spoke about, what happens if that person is voted in for that 3-year term, and now here comes an up-and-coming grandson or whatever, the next generation of mushers, and here, brother, uncle, whoever is now on the board, that youngster who's now done junior Iditarod and coming up ready to run Iditarod can no longer run because of an uncle or a brother-in-law or whatever is now on the board. I think that is very interesting on how that could work. Now, I do agree, as you mentioned, that it could potentially help or hinder the outcome of the race if you do have a relative on there. Could they sway some rules or make decisions based on the best interest of that family member? Typical nepotism is definitely a bad thing in this instance. Okay, I know we have a couple of more. I know we're over time, but what else do we have on the plate?
Just one more quick thing about the family rule. These days we have a lot of cases where people are couples, where they are in committed relationships but just are not married, and I'm wondering also if that would affect this rule. If someone has, let's say, a son or daughter who is living with someone and is essentially the partner of someone, but they're just not married, I wonder if that's a big conflict of interest as well. But it seems that the way this rule is worded, that wouldn't come into play because they're not technically family members. They're not technically married, even though essentially they are.
That's a great point, and I don't want to, hit this into the ground, but that is an excellent point that you brought up. A great example of that is Wade Mars and his girlfriend, who are very active in the mushing community. They put on races, and they're very involved. As we mentioned, he's currently the musher representative for the Iditarod Finishers Club. But can his girlfriend, who I know they are not married now, can his girlfriend be on the board if she so chooses? Because as you mentioned, there is not technically a legal connection there. It's just a cohabitative relationship. That is very interesting, because I know there are many musher couples out there who do not have that legal standing, whether it be marriage or whatever, and that would pose an interesting concept if one of those ran for the board and was voted in.
Yeah, and then getting to the last rule, mushers being held to a high standard of personal conduct on and off the trail year round. and subject to possible penalties if there is any abuse, statements injurious to the race, or any illegal activity. So again, I understand where this is coming from, but the way this is worded worries me. So, presumably this will be interpreted in a way that makes sense. But, what are we defining illegal activity as? If you're on the highway and you're going 2 or 3 miles per hour over the speed limit and you get pulled over, that's certainly not as bad as a lot of other things that you could do. A lot of other things involving dogs, a lot of other things involving people that are illegal, and really much more of a threat. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. I'm also concerned about the banning people for making statements injurious to the race. We've talked a lot about, is it injurious to the race if you say something about one of the sponsors that's critical? And I'm kind of worried that this is going to make people less willing to talk openly about potential problems with the race, and so that always worries me when people are trying to stop other people from speaking out.
Definitely, Alex, this is not old school Iditarod anymore, where lawlessness and the bad boy attitude was sort of a part of the race. If you think about sort of the cowboy lifestyle, or that gritty musher who, is, what I'm saying, just that kind of black hat wearing type guy or gal. That's not how it is anymore in today's society. And I think that this is a way that the Iditarod is showing that they're trying to grow up, and they're trying to remove themselves from that type of stigma, if it is. But I agree with you. How far will it go? I know personally there are several Iditarod mushers out there that have had a DUI or two in their past. Is that going to be an automatic withdrawal? An arrest for conviction for a bag of marijuana, is that going to be reason to expel them? I also think a lot of this stems from what's happened in the last few months or so over what happened in the Yukon Quest this off season, and people getting suspended and expelled and all of that. I think this is their way to try to curtail that. If something happens in another race, they can immediately use that in Iditarod, and I think that's a big part of this rule. Thirdly, I think I agree with you with what you said about statements. I know there's been that quote-unquote gag rule in the works for many years, and it's sort of worked. People have been a little bit more quiet than they were previously, and I think that was because of the threat of being told that they could not race. I think that this heightens that a little bit, but it's interesting how that sort of played out when Dallas was going through all of the issues that he was going through last offseason, and how quickly people spoke out about that, good, bad, or indifferent. What are your thoughts on that, sort of how everybody was quiet for a couple of years, nobody really said anything, everybody was pretty low key and said, kept to their vest, so to speak, and then all of a sudden the news broke with Dallas, and everybody was saying everything. How do you think that sort of goes into play with this new rule?
I'm not really sure. The thing that the Iditarod made a bunch of statements over the past couple of years that the intent of this rule was not to stop people from speaking out and to raising their opinions, but it definitely, as you said, had kind of a chilling effect, at least for a while. I think that there is so much goodwill towards Dallas and for the jolt of energy that he's brought to the sport, that a lot of people who might not have defended somebody else were very quick to come to his defense, and some were very quick to criticize him as well. I think that this is going to be a very interesting thing to watch go down, because I think that we really need to hear some of these voices, and I'm worried that this is going to stop them from speaking out. But also, as you said, there's just in society in general, and also in the Iditarod, there's a growing awareness that some of these people, some of the people who competed are perhaps doing things that don't really represent the Iditarod very well. Things like abuse of partners and things like that. And so, again, I think this is a step in the right direction. I'm not sure that it's really exactly the right step, and my hope is that over the next couple of years that these rules will get refined, and some of the problems that we're pointing out and that other people have pointed out with some of these potential rules will come to the light, and people will discuss them, and we'll have some changes to these rules and refining them so that they really definitely do what I think that they are setting out to do.
One final point from me in regards to this Rule 53, I believe it is are we going to have the Iditarod police out there now who scour social media and YouTube and the kennel Facebook pages and websites of these individuals, and how far does that go? I know that there's one musher in particular that is a very adversarial voice for protecting salmon, and that goes fully against one of the main sponsors of the race that is trying to promote mining and that sort of thing. Where does that person fall into this? That's sort of their main message. That's what they stand for. Is that against the sort of the role or the moral character of Iditarod? And then you can think again back to that is where does the moral character compass fall on Iditarod? Is it too conservative? Is it too liberal? Is it too right down the middle? Who can make that determination on what is the right message to promote? And we could talk about that forever, and whether it's discrimination and all sorts of other things. But again, I think it's important to note, and I know that we've brought this up before, is the Iditarod is its own personal entity, and if you do not agree with the rules and procedures and qualifications of the Iditarod, you do not have to run it. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to, you don't have to pay your entry fee. You don't have to get out there and run your dogs in the race. It is an invitation, not a right, to run Iditarod, and I think a lot of times people don't see it that way. They think that they are mushers, and dang it, I'm going to run Iditarod because I'm a dog musher, and that's not always the case. Any final thoughts on that before we close, Alex?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. There's kind of a cliche that people come to Alaska, and I realize not all Iditarod competitors are from Alaska, but people come to Alaska because they don't really want to be told what to do. And it seems like part of the growing pains, if you will, of Iditarod is that they're going to have to find a way to tell these people who, for the most part, would rather just be free to do what they want to do and pursue things as they see fit, are going to be, given a whole bunch of new rules that they have to follow. And I'm wondering how that's going to affect sort of the character of the people who enter, and maybe some people who are more, on the libertarian side and would rather just be left alone to do whatever they want to do, might find that this is going to become too oppressive a race for them to run.
A great point. I saw a post, I don't know if it was in the actual articles or in the comments or on social media, where it said that these rules were fully intended to take the politics out of Iditarod. And I think for a lot of intents and purposes, it did the exact opposite of that. It included a heck of a lot of politics in the race that probably shouldn't be there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a very delicate balancing act. So I would prefer that there be absolutely zero politics in Iditarod, but also I think that the intent of these new rules is to address some serious problems that we've been talking about for the past couple of years. I don't personally think that these rules do that perfectly, but I think that they are good first steps, and I just hope that they're followed by additional steps, and this isn't the be-all and end-all of it.
Excellent, for sure. Alex, anything you want to say in closing before we go?
Just wanted to wish everybody a very happy summer, and remember, it's all about the dogs.
It is all about the dogs. Stay tuned to Mushing Radio. Check your iTunes feed or Apple or Stitcher or whatever. We have been posting pretty frequently over on our feed, not only on Mushing Radio, but our daily dog episodes and the Sci Vibe and everything that happens with dogs over on our little network. We hope that you enjoy our shows, and if you do, please leave us some feedback, whether it's a review or over on our Facebook pages. Let us know what you want us to talk about and answer your questions, and Alex or I or one of our other hosts will be sure to do so. Alex, it's a pleasure. I'm glad we're back on the air after a little bit of a hiatus there. Let's jump into things here in the off season and make it work. I'll talk to you again soon, okay?
Okay, thanks, Robert.
Thank you. On behalf of my co-host, Alex Stein, this is Robert Forto for Mushing Radio. We will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
Did you know that Alaska Dog Works trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska Dog Works on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.
If you like our podcast, there are a few things you can do. You can take a couple of minutes and go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. You can also check out all of our DogWorks Radio sponsors and promotions in our show notes. Another thing you can do is go over to Facebook, like our Facebook page, and one last thing, please tell all of your friends by spreading the word about DogWorks Radio. Thank you so much for listening to us. We really appreciate you.
DogWorks Radio is produced by Robert Forto. Logo art by Angry Squirrel Studios. DogWorks Radio is produced in conjunction with KVRF 89.7 in Palmer, Alaska.
For dog training advice, you can contact Alaska Dog Works at 907-841-1686 or visit their website at alaskadogworks.com. If you have a show idea or would like to be a guest, please contact us by sending an email to live@dogworksradio.com.